Hello everybody and welcome to Land 254. My name is Richard Zoltek. I'll be the instructor for this program. We're going to be focusing on designing a deck for this program, and we're going to be introducing elements such as how do we design a deck, how do we approach a deck of this nature, what are the Ontario Building Code requirements and regulations required for us to meet a set of documents that can be applied for permit. And we're going to break it down piece by piece. I'm introducing you here today to a final project. It's all going to be on 11 by 17 sheets of paper. And this is once all of the elements have been put together. So it gives you an overall picture of what we're going to be doing in the project. So the project itself has a series of required elements, and I do suggest you write these down so you're very familiar with it. Part of your requirement is to research the different elements I'm going to be identifying to make sure you have actually understood the size requirements, the spatial requirements, and things of that nature for those particular elements. So this is a two-sectional deck, and I say sectional in the sense that there's a step down between one level and another, and each one has different pieces to it that you'll be exploring, and we'll identify them as we go along. So the final project after your 14 weeks will be the submission of a set of drawings. They'll show the deck plan as well as any framing detail, as well as any deck pattern details. It'll show where the fixed planters are, where there be a gazebo, a kitchen location, moving planters, a screen, a handrail, as well as a small series of steps. Everything will be properly dimensioned and noted so that anybody that actually wants to build this could actually build it based on this set of drawings. Now the backdrop is a CAD drawing that has a house that is going to be part of this deck. It directly relates to the plan view, and we'll discuss how those two relationships are. And you'll be providing an elevation, there'll be 3 of them, from the different views of the house and how this deck plan and the elements sit on the property. And as we get through the elevations, we're also going to be working with the Ontario Building Code to be able to determine joist sizes and beams, and focusing on Simpson strong ties for any of the attachments. So here you can see the 2 deck levels. They're drawn in CAD in 2 different colors. You can see where the posts are located, where the beams are located, where the framing is located. We're also going to be looking at elements such as how to frame properly to support, for instance, here kitchen cabinetry, how to frame around screen elements, post elements for handrails, how do we provide openings for fixed planters, and then a basic staircase. And in the table above, you'll notice that there's a number of different beam sizes and joist sizes. That will be different for every single project. These are all individual projects. There's no sort of collaboration on any of this information whatsoever. However, as is the case, you can always ask each other for help or guidance or direction. It's just that each project will be completely individual. So once we get through a framing plan, we're going to be looking at the actual pergola that we have here. And the pergola will consist of 4 posts. Those posts can either sit on the existing beam or on the beam of the deck, on the column of the deck, or be independent. They will have footings. They'll have lintels or beams for supports, as well as a ceiling structure. And we will be doing not only a plan view, but a couple different elevational views showing how it intersects the actual deck, how it may have different structural elements associated with it, how it'll have some details that will be used in the particular project, and we will be looking at some of the details as part of the drawing set. For the actual kitchen installation, we're doing something that's very basic. It's simply a steel frame with a stone finish that is more of a faux finish. And the actual elements, the stove or the barbecue, the sink, and the side burners are all from manufacturer specs. And drawings like this will simply be dragging and dropping in place to use the actual manufacturer's drawing as part of our drawing set. So that's kind of the big picture of where we're going to, and that's going to take us 14 weeks to get to. In the meantime, there's going to be a fair bit of research for us to get to this point, depending on your deck design. So this is going to be assignment 1. It's going to be due in 3 weeks' time. It's worth 10% of the final grade. And what we're going to be doing here is looking at the client requirements. When you are assigned a deck of this nature, you have to meet with the client and break down the specifics of what they want. So the project breakdown basically looks like this. We're going to be looking at a two-tier deck, one riser or one step between the two tiers, with an overall size of approximately 1,000 to 1,500 square feet. And I'll show you how to calculate that when we get into some of the material that I'll be providing very shortly. So each tier is supposed to be large enough for a table that would sit 6 people around it and have some sort of umbrella, whether it be in the middle of the table or outside the table, hanging over top of it for some additional shade or directional shade. Then there's supposed to be other areas on the deck itself. So they want a sitting area which will have 2 one-person oversized types of chairs, as well as 1 two-person oversized couch and a central coffee table. Now you can imagine, if you will, you'll also want some side tables or something like that to put down coffee or desserts. So this primary outdoor living room is designed for whether it be after dinner, before dinner, or if they have guests come over, the guests can sit out there with them and have desserts, or actually eat at the coffee table location. It all depends on how they're going to be using the space. So it's multi-purpose, but it's supposed to be almost have that living room feel to it. And in here, you're also going to include a rectangular pergola over top of it, and then they'll provide some level of shade. You can put in and incorporate lighting into it. It could be a type of pergola that has a canvas canopy for a bit more of a enclosed type of feel to it. It is going to have a maximum bay area of 14 feet post to post, which simply means that as you design this, you won't have your posts separated from each other greater than 14 feet. The north side of the lot requires a privacy fence and a windscreen. This area here has some pretty brutal views, so we want to close that off, and that's why we need this privacy screen. And it can be combined with a fixed planter as well, so you can combine the two elements together. On the south side, there's going to be some stairs, simply 2 risers. We don't want anything greater than that. Once we reach 3 risers, it changes how the Ontario Building Code has this requirement set out for staircases. So we're going to limit it to 2 risers, or basically 2 steps. And all other locations will have a single riser or a step down from the deck to grade level. And again, that's to meet certain code requirements. There will be an outdoor kitchen, which includes a barbecue operational sink with hot and cold water, counter space with a mini fridge. So that will be something that will end up being later on in the project, but we have to think about it right away as we're designing it. The deck will be constructed out of pressure-treated wood beams, and joists with appropriate decking material. So the decking material could be wood or composite, but we still need to support it using wood joists and wood beams. All of this will be supported on top of concrete piers. And depending on where the pergola is, it may have its own independent pier, share a pier. There'll be different scenarios, and we'll be identifying that as we go through the project. And the project to be considered or is to consider all mechanical connectors to use Simpson strong ties. Simpson strong ties are available at Home Hardware, Home Depot, and they are Ontario Building Code approved connection devices. So that's the basic elements that we're going to be looking at for the project as we go through this. So rather than read the rest of this, we'll get back to it. I want to show you some student examples. So the first part of this is to get to sketch these different elements, but we need to start with the plan. And so this is part of the Blackboard series of drawings. And in here you'll see a plan that has a grid already laid out on it. So this grid pattern is a 2 foot by 2 foot square, which equals 4 square feet, and therefore it's very easy to calculate our 1,000 to 1,500 square foot requirement. In the upcoming lessons, we're going to learn about how this layout is affected by the site analysis. So where the sun rises, sets, where are the prevailing winds, what are the views, things of that nature. But for now, this gives us this idea of how big the deck is, and its relationship to the house. And that will be important. So as we work through the requirements of the deck by the owner, we're going to see how it integrates and relates not only to the outside but also to the inside. Because the inside spaces are also very important how they relate to the deck. We have a kitchen area, we have a great room area, we have a formal dining room area, and all those require some analysis relative to the site, relative to the deck, to understand how people are going to be using it. So there's a number of projects that I've presented here just to show you what students have done in the past. So your first design is going to be a sketch design that sits on top of this. So how will we work with that? Basically, this is an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. So what you're going to do is print this off, and you can print this off as a single 11 by 17 sheet at Staples or at the school. Or what you can do is print off on your home printer two 8.5 by 11s and tape them together. Now make sure you tape them accurately, because we're going to be inserting this in CAD and it requires some accuracy in order to be able to align this in CAD and then be able to trace over top of it. And then what I recommend is that you get some tracing paper. And tracing paper is available in different sizes, 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17. If you're using 8.5 by 11s, you'll be very careful to tape the pieces together. Or what you can do is buy a roll, or if you have other individuals that are in the same sort of field, you can split a container of 11 by 17s. They usually come in 50 sheet packs. All you need are about 3 or 4 of them to work with on this project. So as you lay the tracing paper on top of it, you'll be able to see the actual grid below it, and you're going to work your design. And that will come in lessons in the near future just to show you how that process actually works. So here's some student examples, and that's what they've done. And this is where you really need to take close notes to understand how this project is going to integrate. So the inside of the house itself, and we'll be repeating this, there's a kitchen area, there's a great room area, and then there's a formal dining area. So the space is going to be used as an outdoor kitchen area that will have the requirements as outlined with the barbecue and all that. It will be using a space for a table with 6 chairs, as well as some fixed planters, movable planters. And the planters are to help break up the size and the scale of the deck, because it is a fairly large deck, as well as to help create some zones and finishes. And then there will also be an area for entertaining after, let's say you have guests over at the dining room and you want to walk outside. So here's one of the concepts. And all the projects are going to be noted with sort of the detail that you've identified in your project, as well as any sort of elevations that will be relative to what you're trying to present. Now this is a very simple example. It's been traced over using pencil, maybe a bit of a Sharpie marker, and then just using pencil crayons. And all the submissions will require color. It's to break up and to show us and to help show your presentation. This would be something you would be showing a client. So there needs to be some attention to detail in order to make sure that the information presents well. Also, what's really important is scale. So when you're looking at some of these projects here, you got to make sure all the different elements are the right size relative to what we're working with. For instance, counters are usually 2 to 3 feet wide, depending on whether you have an eating counter or it's just a workstation counter. That's part of your research. Tables for sitting of 6 people have a very specific dimension. This may or may not actually meet the requirement when I'm looking at it right here, and I can tell very quickly whether it is the right size. The grid also helps me. Screen requirements, how tall they are, how many posts that they have, what are the widths of them, those are all requirements that have to be researched in order to create this properly. So here are some elevations. This shows you the step down between the deck elements. It looks like these are fixed planters as well as some movable planters. That's where they've decided to put the staircase. So this is an example, and this is an example that's using some sort of marker, a designer marker or a watercolor type of marker. Here's something that somebody's created. They have a bit of paint watercolors, and that's what they've decided to work with. And here you can see how they've laid this out with a walkthrough in the kitchen and a seating area. It looks like they're trying to identify that it's a bar. Symbols like this are really not required. They've identified very clearly the movable planters, also some very basic dimensions which are important. They've clearly shown where the pergola is, as well as the handrail that's going to be required for the project, a separation in spaces. There's your step down with another sitting area, some additional movable planters in this particular case. But even something like this, it's not bad, but the seats are not in proportion. We don't need additional things like water features. Those are very, very nice elements, but if they're not used properly, they're actually incorrect for a project of this nature. And as people start working through the projects, they'll be thinking about their elevations. And in this particular case, they really wanted to show off how this kitchen looks in order to give that impressional view of that. And they've included a partial pergola over top of the kitchen area. They've shown their screen area, which also has a seating area and some fixed planters, which is kind of nice to have in this particular application, as well as where their step down is into this lower section. They've included in here a non-required item, which is still something that was kind of nice to have, a bar with a sitting area. The fountain, again, is something we're not going to explore. It's fairly complicated, and it's not really intended for this part of the program at this point. Now, this assignment that you see here will be due in 3 weeks' time at the end of the class period in the third class session. So it's very important that you start working on the research now. And what's expected of you is to actually research different companies to find out the sizes of their barbecues. So you want outdoor barbecue specifications. There's a number of companies that actually do kitchen layouts. You need to research the size of a typical table or seating area, how big the chairs or the seats actually will be, as well as actually have clips of that. And I'm going to be showing you an example of the research that I would expect that accompanies this documentation, because it is part of the documentation that will be included in your sketch design. So none of these components or elements are made up. There's no way at this point in your landscape career that you have the experience to be able to make up designs. Plus, it's something that needs to meet the Ontario Building Code, and it's very easy to determine when details are made up versus ones that are established. So let's continue on and look at what the actual requirements are for your submission. So the student will sketch a deck layout onto the provided electronic 11 by 17 document. That's the grid drawing. And you'll print out either one 11 by 17 sheet or two 8.5 by 11s on your printer for the project floor plan provided, as well as sketch out freehand. Now that's really important. It has to be freehand. Now, I don't want you to use rulers. The idea is to start developing sketching techniques and to be able to use your hand when you're drawing this to some degree of accuracy. So really focus on the grid that's underneath it and try to match it as closely as you can. And then using the components identified in the breakdown of all the different elements, and as well as I've got a sample I'm going to show you of the specs that I expect from you for this particular project. Now remember, do not copy anything here. That's plagiarism. And it is not tolerated whatsoever. It's a 0. And if it's something that's consistent, you will be asked to be removed from the program. So make sure by all means you don't copy anything. You are the, and in here I give you the example. You're best to use tracing paper to create your designs. And what's nice about tracing paper is that you can lay sheets on top of sheets. So as you draw something and you make an error, we don't erase things. What we do is we put a new sheet on top and we correct it. And once you're happy with that design, you're going to do a final tracing. And the final tracing is something that you spend a lot of time on, making sure it's carefully outlined. This is what you're going to be scanning in to bring into CAD. So you want to make sure that it is a really good, clean, crisp drawing. Then once you've done all this, take a copy of your plan and color it up using any of the different techniques, whether it be watercolors. Those tend to be a bit more expensive. You can buy some decent crayons, decent pencil crayons, which is easier and cheaper. I do not expect you to use crayons. And as per an example that I've provided here, you'll find that you can get some really nice, clean pencil crayons that will do an excellent job. And I've provided here some links to some different techniques that are used to do SketchUp or drawing up of this nature, and they're easy to follow along, and you can create something really, really nice. So after you color the outline all the major components with a fine line black marker, that's important, and then you're going to label it. Now you have to make sure your writing is neat, printed. Everything that you're going to be doing is printed neatly so it is legible. If it can't be read, it doesn't get a mark, and that's basically how we're going to look at every single project. So after you color it, outline all the major components in your fine line marker, label it. Basically, I've mentioned in here, if I can't read your writing, it's wrong. Keep the labels off the deck, but provide neat leaders. Leaders are the lines that point to the different elements. Once this is all done, you're going to scan your project in, and scan it on a flatbed scanner, not with your camera. That will distort the edges, and it can't be brought into CAD properly. It can't be scaled up properly, and it can't be traced over properly. So you need a flatbed scanner. It may be worth the investment at Staples. I think it's probably 20 cents or something of that nature to flatbed scan your images so it comes out properly in AutoCAD. Now the more work, detail, and attention you put here, the easier the CAD part of the project is going to be. If you're really sloppy and it's a mess, your CAD elements, your CAD efforts are going to be twice as much. So make sure you're doing it properly. And then the document assembly. This is critical. It has to be exactly as stated here. The final project will be 11 by 17 format in PDF. So everything is going to be sent to me as a single one PDF file that contains all the pages. And that's important. So if you have each page scanned in and you send me 5 different pages or 8 different pages of your project, I only look at the first one. So the first one, the first document, must contain all the pages embedded or bound together. So you're going to have a title page, complete with your name, student name, number, all that. Plan view of the rear yard, that's the top view, in CAD with house and design grid only. So that's the drawing that's already there. That's the CAD drawing I'm providing. You're going to trace over that very, very neatly. And then draw to scale, 3/16 inch, which is the scale that's actually on the page that's already there. You're going to add color. Now that's important. Sketch design of the deck components over the grid area. Sketch fully labeled with components and overall dimensions. This is how I check the actual overall size of your drawing, how many square feet it is. Sketch to include deck floor layout, kitchen, pergola outline only. So the pergola outline, what you're going to show are the 4 posts and the overall outside area of the pergola, the overhangs, and I'll get to that a bit later on. And then the deck showing potential furniture layouts. And this is how I'm going to be marking the particular project. So it's very clear how you're going to assign, or how I assign each mark. If you're missing an element, you don't get that mark. And it's out of 100 marks, but the overall marking scheme is 10% of your final grade. So along with this documentation, I'm expecting you to provide your research documentation. So I'll give you an example of that. Each of the components that were required will actually be available either online or in a store, and they'll have dimensions associated with them. And that's what you're supposed to use to get a sense of the scale. So for instance, this particular item I had found online, it actually has a little diagram. If you click on it, it'll give you the specific dimensions of each element. Now here it's not visible, and that's fine because you're supposed to do the research and you're supposed to find those numbers out. So I'm expecting you to use this data that comes along with this particular piece of furniture to identify exactly how big it should be in your drawing. Remember, nothing's made up. You're not coming up with the numbers in your head. You're actually getting real examples. Here's an example of a table and chair. It actually gives you some dimensions, but you're going to have to add them together. And I have supporting documentation that says how much room should you have around each of the chairs. So this is what I would be using in this case. And once again, I could click to find out more information about that particular product. Here's an example I like about a screen with a fixed planter in place. Now, even though it's sitting on top of the deck, it will be considered fixed because the screen won't be moved. It will be attached to the deck. So you can use combinations, as in this case, and they would work very well. The idea here is to come up with a design, so some sort of theme that works throughout your project. And this can be easily built. In fact, this particular case online had complete dimensional and drawings that indicated exactly how the construction is. And you want to make that consistent throughout your deck design. So if you have not only movable planters but fixed planters, you can use the same sort of design elements. And then for the kitchen, I'm expecting you to do some research to find out exactly how this is built. This is the style of kitchen cabinetry that we're going to have on the deck. So it'll be part of the deck component, and we can simply block underneath the deck to support it. So it is a light steel frame structure. It has a concrete board as a covering, and that's typical out here. So the concrete board doesn't deteriorate because of weather. And then you can finish something on top of it, whether it be a very thin veneered stone or some sort of granites or anything of that nature that would be adequate for outdoor use. And then it has components. These are outdoor components that are available to be placed within these different locations. This particular research that I did had very specific dimensions that were available with it as well. And that's really helpful and useful to lay out your kitchen pattern. And then it also had a view of what that's going to look like. And there's your faux finish or your stone finish. It's actually stone, but it's a veneer. It's a very thin product. And it creates a nice sort of look for this particular application. That can be placed right on top of a deck. And then you're going to research the actual pergola. So find one that you like. Find the design elements that you like, find the structure that is something that's suitable for your needs, and then get as much information about it as possible. This is a 12 foot by 16, and notice 16 feet, they've got an intermediate piece, so it's an 8 foot opening and a 12 foot opening. Remember, as part of the outline, I mentioned that these posts cannot be any further than 14 feet away. Or 14 feet apart. It's to help us when we get into the documentation of using the Ontario Building Code to actually design this to code. And then I've got another element there as a screen that is separate, so something that doesn't actually have a fixed planter in place as well. So I want this level of documentation to support anything that you draw in your particular project. So there's your project. From start to end. It'll be due, like I mentioned to you, at the end of the day in 3 classes. So this is class number 1. We're going to have another set of lessons in next week, and then the 3rd week is when this project will be due. And I'm expecting this level of quality as your final project, identifying all the parts and pieces, drawing elevations wherever necessary, and these can be reflected in the drawings or in the actual PDF files, the images that you did your research in, identifying very clearly where the steps are, where the seating arrangements are, fixed planters, movable planters. Your dimensions will be of the major components only. So for instance, in this case, we have a 8 foot component and then a 20 foot, and then this breaks down in a bit more detail. Here what's missing, this shows an 8 foot section, but doesn't show the rest of the section. But what's nice here, it actually shows how the grid lays in underneath, so you can really get a sense of the size and the scale. I do want an overall size of the deck. Remember, it has to be between 1,000 and 1,500 square feet. So make sure you meet that as part of the requirements. And that, like I said, is due in 3 classes.